So a few years back, during my senior year of high school, my stepdad made a very poor decision. His decision has caused a lot of pain and suffering for my mom and I, and we are both still in counseling for PTSD and anxiety disorders. Just for a little context, my parents got divorced when I was 7 years old. I'm also a female if it matters to anyone. I was used to them each dating other people, and I was actually very happy for my mom when she told me she had met somebody new. Until I met him. As soon as I met this guy, we'll call him Don, I had a horrible feeling in my gut. Don was originally from Florida, and he moved to Kentucky right before he met my mom, leaving behind his ex-wife and son. Red flag. He was a weirdo, in every sense of the word. Always trying to start an argument over petty topics, or walked around shirtless, with his strange nipple rings out while my friends were over. Although he was weird, he was never threatening or abusive at all towards me or my mom. That is until one night, right before my mom's birthday. I remember the night clearly. It was my best friend's birthday, and I was waiting for her to come to pick me up to go to dinner. My mom and Don also had plans to go out and watch the UK-Florida basketball game. As an only child, my mom has always been very protective over me, so she wanted to wait until I left with my friend before she left with Don. This, for whatever reason, really pissed Don off, and he stormed out of the house without her. I left shortly after. I returned around 4 or 5 hours later. The game had been over for some time, and Don had not come home yet. My mom acted very weird and nervous when I asked her about him, and just ushered me off to go to sleep. As I was sleeping, I was woke up by my mom screaming my name. Obviously disoriented. I groped around for my phone, thinking I had overslept and was late for school. When I checked the time, it was near midnight. My mom screamed my name again and told me to shut my door and call 911. This is pretty much when shit hit the fan. I started freaking out, and I jumped up to slam my door and lock it. Right as I did this, 3 gunshots flew through my bedroom door, narrowly missing me. I grabbed my phone and jumped to the other side of my bed and laid on the ground, hoping to avoid any more bullets. I barely had time to get out my address and inform them that someone was trying to kill me, and before I heard my mom scream one last time, before 2 more gunshots rang out. Everything fell silent, and I had a horrible feeling that someone had just murdered my mom. I got up from the floor when I heard the person begin to throw themselves against my door in an attempt to break it. All that was running through my mind was getting to my mom and staying alive. Eventually, he broke my door down, and I was horrified to see that it was my stepdad. His eyes were glazed over as he grabbed me by my shirt collar and put the barrel of the gun to my head. I screamed and fought as he said over and over, "Is this what you wanted?" At this point, a lot of the details get hazy, as I had a ridiculous amount of adrenaline pumping through me. But I somehow managed to pick him up and push him down onto my bed. I used both of my hands to hold his hand with the gun away from me, and tried with all my might to get it up against his head so I could blow his brains out. We struggled like this for a while until my mom came in. Gunshot went to the neck and stomach, and laid across the gun while telling me to run. I hysterically ran out my front door and up the street to my neighbors. I scared them half to death, but I was able to redial 911 and tell them exactly what was happening. As I was at my neighbor's, my mom was still in my room with my stepdad. She says this is when she became very weak from blood loss, and rolled off of him onto the ground. She asked why he was doing this, and he simply put the gun in his mouth. She took this opportunity to run out the front door right into the arms of a police officer. In the end, the police ended up having a standoff with Don as he barricaded himself inside. He made the mistake of pointing a gun at them, and they blew half of his dick off, small retribution, and then arrested him. He is currently serving 45 years in prison, and to this day will give no reason as to why he decided to do this to us. In all honesty, I do not care. My mom and I lived through it, and have grown much closer because of it. We actually got matching tattoos reading, "Strength comes from the madness we survive." So, Don, I really hope everyone in prison enjoys you and your half-penis. This happened a couple years back, but my nephew likes to remind me frequently, even though I still remember it pretty well. Little background. I had a kinda crappy car with some issues that I was too broke at the time to fix. The car would occasionally die while idling with the AC on, and the driver's window had the propensity to never fully close, or, when it did, it promptly fell down at least 3 inches. This is important to know later on, which is just as well because I'm a smoker that can't turn on the AC. Anyways, it was a pretty typical day as I was making the short drive back home after picking my nephew up from preschool. We were about halfway home when I came to a 4-way intersection on one of the back roads. We live right on the border of a farm town. As I rolled up to the stop sign, I looked both ways for traffic and saw a bald Hispanic young man in front of me, chasing after a car, passing by me on the opposite side of the road. He slowed down near my car, seemingly out of breath, and upset that the car had left him. From what I had witnessed, it looked like this was just a normal guy whose ride had accidentally passed him, and he was trying to flag them down. I looked back over my left shoulder at the car that he had been running after, and noticed that they had slowed down. Always taking the opportunity to be a helpful citizen, I rolled down my window and said, "Sir, was that your ride? They slowed down. You may still be able to catch them." He spun around to peer at my window, and everything about his appearance made me realize my mistake almost immediately. He had dirt, dead grass, and a couple specks of blood on his jeans and shirt. This wasn't too alarming. As I said, we live on the edge of a farming community. It could easily have been blood from livestock, or an injury out in the crops. But his eyes were wild, bloodshot and burning into my face with malevolence. Sweat pouring down his shiny dome as he started shouting in my face. Fear washed over me. It wasn't his yelling that scared me. It was that they were these unintelligible half-sentences. I was terrified and confused, but for some reason I couldn't bring myself to move. Like instead of fight or flight kicking in, my response was freeze, as if there was a T-Rex and he wouldn't be able to see me if I just didn't move a muscle. Finally, I found some semblance of order and spoke up again. I said as calmly as I could, "I'm sorry, I don't quite understand." But I knew the fear in my eyes betrayed my outward chill. He again responded with his now screeching in gibberish, with occasional phrases that I could vaguely understand, one of which was, "You stopped! You're the one!" At this point, his head was mere inches away from mine, with one hand grasping my half-rolled-down window. I shakily told him to calm down and asked if he needed any help. At the same time, I cautiously and stealthily locked my door with my elbow and tried to roll the window up. He banged on the door when he recognized what I was doing, and the window fell back down. He looked me dead in the eye and screamed, I don't, Mom. Ah, my stomach! He was screaming so loud by now that his spit and the sweat dripping down his face was actually landing in little flecks on my face. And he had quickly maneuvered his clammy hand through the opening in the window and grabbed my arm, squeezing my wrist with a death grip. My only thought at that point was, one of my poor nephew's first memories is gonna be his witness of my murder in broad daylight. Suddenly, I heard a honk behind me and looked back out my rear window, desperately trying to make eye contact with the middle-aged woman in the driver's seat of her grey sedan, silently begging for help. But she didn't seem to notice or care. Only that I was holding her up and she needed to go. Several cars backed up behind her. I looked up at the guy who was still babbling on and managed to cut him off mid-speech. I told him, "Look, sir, I'm sorry, I can't help you. But there are cars behind me that are waiting for me to move." And before I could react, he took off running towards the cars behind me, wailing in a fervor at them. Out of sheer terror, I slammed my foot on the accelerator and peeled out through the intersection, narrowly avoiding side-swiping the woman in the grey sedan, who had tried to pull around me. After I was a safe distance away, I breathed out shakily and glanced in my rear-view mirror to see his silhouette still running in the middle of the road. Something flashed in the sunlight in his hand. It didn't hit me until the shock wore off that he could have had a knife. After I'd put a few miles between us and the man, I apologized to my nephew for being stupid and putting him in a dangerous situation, and took him out to get ice cream, both of us being visibly shaken. We talked about it over some soft serve, and it calmed me down enough to soothe my frayed nerves and forget about it a bit. I kept an eye out for anyone fitting the man's description, or of similar events on the local news and police scanner. But that incident was the last I saw or heard of him, thankfully. I still have no idea what was wrong with him, whether he was on drugs, mentally ill, or what have you. We were pretty close to the man's prison, but it was for non-violent offenders, and he seemed pretty damn violent. I hadn't even realized until I told my sister about what had happened, that the same thing likely occurred with the other driver of the car that was speeding away from him just as I showed up. Any time I drive anywhere near that intersection now, I feel uneasy. And if he dreaded to pop up out of nowhere and stab me through my open window, and I no longer feel comfortable being the Good Samaritan that stops to help someone on the road for fear of hearing, "You stopped! You're the one!" again. This happened to me about 6 to 7 years ago. So it was the beginning of summer, and I was traveling to my summer home, like I did every summer. I live in a small southeastern European country, and this is pretty normal for most people here. I would usually travel by train, overnight. Because I would get to sleep most of the trip, the train took about 8 hours. It didn't cross a great distance, but was just really slow. Anyway, I've done the same trip alone a couple of times already and never had a problem. Also, my country is pretty safe, so taking this trip on my own was never really a concern for me or my parents. The train left at 11 p.m. and was scheduled to arrive at 7 in the morning, meaning I had 7 to 8 hours of sleep, which was great. At first I was alone in the compartment, but after I got settled, a girl about my age asked me if she could join me in my compartment, and I said yes. We started talking a bit, the usual, where are you from, how old, what do you do? Even though I was comfortable traveling alone, and was bigger than her, and a year older, I was happy she was there. We talked until midnight, and then decided to try and get some sleep. Since the train was pretty empty and it was just the two of us in our compartment, we could both lie down. The compartment had 3 rests on each side. so we each spread across 3 seats. I had just started dozing off when I heard our compartment door opening. There was a man standing at the door. He looked at us for a second and then asked, "Do you have any room for me?" Now, what was weird about this was that, first of all, the train was pretty empty, so I was certain that there were other completely empty compartments. Secondly, he saw us both lying down, taking up all the space, so there really was no need to ask. And finally, it was the way he phrased it. Do we have any room for him? In the moment he asked this, I was still not sleeping. I squirmed a little and started to answer. But he left the second I started squirming. I remember him closing the door as I was about to answer, and I thought it was weird, but whatever. My sleepy brain didn't want to bother, so I forgot about it instantly. I think the girl and I exchanged a what the fuck look. That was about it. However, not more than 5 minutes passed and he was back. Again the same. He opened the door and asked us if we had any room for him. I was a stupid, scared kid back then, so I just stayed silent and pretended to sleep. Luckily, the girl was smarter than me, and even though she looked timid, and she just sort of yelled at him, "No, can't you see there is no room? We're trying to sleep." He just closed the door and left. I kind of chuckled, probably my nerves. She smiled at me and that was it. I somehow managed to fall asleep again, although it was very light sleep, and I kept waking up throughout the night. Probably for the better. The girl and I went our separate ways in the morning as we were both travelling further. I didn't have Facebook back then, so I didn't stay in contact with her, and I had forgotten her name over the years. Although for some reason now that I'm writing this, Ivana rings a bell. I will, however, be forever grateful to her for possibly saving me that night, and for teaching me you can always stand up for yourself, even though you're a small, fragile-looking girl. We didn't get a good look at the guy because it was dark, but my impression back then was that he was between 30 and 40, so had no business to hang out with us, and if he wanted to sleep, he had plenty of empty compartments. That is why I think he had something else in mind. I was so happy the girl was there because I have no idea what I would have done on my own. I like to think that I would have stood up for myself, but honestly, I don't know. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to episode 34. I'm making some good progress with that little project I was telling you about. I only need 3 more stories, I think. Although if I get more, I'll certainly use more. And I've got a few days to acquire them. I'd also like to thank you all for the great feedback on the last video. All your likes and comments really do make it worthwhile. So anyway, the game plan for this week remains pretty much the same. That's a video a day. That's going to be, well, Monday's already gone by, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we'll all have True Scary Stories videos, culminating in a special on Friday. Saturday, Sunday, I haven't quite decided about yet, but I may of course upload additional content in between then and now. Probably a few fairy tales, because I'm really getting into the fairy tales. I find them a lot more fun than the creepypastas. Perhaps it's because in some ways these are old tales and you know, to a point we're all familiar with various aspects of them. Plus they do pose a bit of a challenge in terms of performance, because you can't just read a fairy tale, you've got to really get into it. And I like that. That's a lot of fun for me. And judging by the feedback, I think you guys seem to enjoy it when I do that too. So thanks very much for that. Anyway, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.